Welcome again. My name is Eleni Anslas. I'm from the Community Health and Wellness Department here at Suburban Hospital. Today we have Jim French, who is a clinical social worker and works here at the outpatient unit at Suburban Hospital. Today he'll be talking to us about resilience. I'm sure that everyone has heard about resilience, especially the past few years. And so he's going to talk to us about how to maintain resilience, how to work to build our mental health toolkit, if you will, and lower anxiety. Before we begin, I want to just go over some housekeeping items. So we are recording today's webinar. The recording will be made available in the coming days. So if you would like to view the recording again, we will make sure that you will receive it in the next few days on the Suburban Hospital YouTube site. Secondly, we're going to keep the Q&A. I'm sure everyone has questions. We're going to keep that till the end of the program, end of the presentation rather. And then once if you have a question, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we will get it, and we will go over the questions. And then third and finally, evaluation. We'd love to hear your feedback on today's presentation, what takeaway items you've takeaway things you have got from this presentation, any possible future topics. We'd love to hear your feedback. So when this webinar is done, I will send you the link to the evaluation. Please take a few minutes to fill out that evaluation. That would be really helpful. So I will pass it along to Jim French. And thank you again, Jim, for being here this afternoon, and we will get started.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Eleni. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining this call, this webinar that we're hosting here at Suburban Hospital. Again, my name is Jim French. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a therapist at Suburban's outpatient day treatment program, also called a partial hospitalization. So this is a component of our behavioral health unit here, and I'm one of the therapists who work on that unit. So as Eleni had mentioned, I'm been asked to speak to you a little bit about the topic of resilience. And so I hope you find this webinar informative as well as useful. So moving right into it, what we define resilience as, if we're looking at the Oxford Dictionary, we're looking at resilience as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. So the American Psychological Association, the APA, discusses resilience as resilience being the process and outcome of successfully adapting to difficult and challenging life experiences, especially through mental, emotional, and behavioral flexibility, as well as adjustment to external and internal demands. So plainly stated, resilience is the ability to bounce back. So what are we bouncing back from? So when we talk about when we talk about resilience, we're talking about bouncing back from trauma, from illness, from loss, from grief. We're talking about bouncing back from life's failures, life's disappointments, life's pains. What are those demands or challenges that life's experiences test us or test our ability to adapt? Below is a small representation of those events or circumstances which can impact us. Most recently, and probably most close to everyone's mind, is the current global pandemic. We are still in the middle of it, right? We have made great strides, but how have we been able to manage that stress? How have we been able to manage those situations as they come up? Other things like relationship stressors, financial crises, traumatic events, death of loved ones, and serious illness, right? One constant in the human experience is that we all have to deal with change, and our ability to engage with those life stressors and bounce back will be tested. This is a guarantee. We are all going to have to face change at some point in our lives, and we're all going to face some level of challenge or suffering. So when we're discussing resilience and we look at individuals who may be not able to access or have a limited capacity for resilience, what are some of the things that might be prevalent in those regards? So they may be associated with having a higher risk of developing a mood disorder, right? Depression and anxiety are a lot higher in people who have difficulty managing resilience. There may be an increased feeling of hopelessness, right? People may have challenges in terms of being able to pull themselves out of situations where they're feeling hopeless or helpless. Distress tolerance. So we talk about individuals who have low resilience or low resilience ability, having low distress tolerance. It's sort of an inability to be able to tolerate or not become overwhelmed so easily, right? Perhaps those individuals who have limited capacity for resilience also rely on unhealthy coping mechanisms, maybe avoidance, social isolation, avoiding large crowds, self-medicating, whether it's with drugs or alcohol, right? In addition, low resilience outcomes could include rigid thinking. So that inability to be elastic in our thinking, the inability to be able to approach situations multifaceted, but instead just sort of hard line and hard driving one way. So let's talk about resilience. Some people say that resiliency is an inherited trait, right? Is it a skill or is it an inherited trait? Is it something that we are born with or is it something that we can learn? Can we develop it? There's a common misconception that resilient people are born with that natural personality trait, possessing some special skill or undefined superpower, right? Something that makes them a little bit better able to deal with situations than others. But it's not that black and white. The reality is definitely not that black and white. Our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, they all play a large role in how resilient we can be in facing adversity or challenge. You can learn to be resilient. It is a trainable and attainable skill. It's not just something that is inherent in someone's personality. So what are the characteristics of a resilient person or resilient people? So resilient individuals tend to have a cluster of these symptoms. It does not mean exclusively if you must have all of these to be a resilient person, but a cluster of these characteristics. So generally speaking, resilient people tend to be strong problem solvers. They're able to look at a situation and be able to pick it apart and maybe break it down into smaller pieces, or they're able to navigate and see a way through, right? Those people who are resilient tend to have ability to cope with stress and regulate their emotions. So this is the converse of what we were just talking about in terms of can you do the opposite of being low distress tolerance? Can you regulate your emotions? Can you get in and find a way to balance and move beyond sort of that stress? Characteristics of other characteristics include maintaining a positive attitude or a positive outlook about themselves or their abilities. So resilient individuals tend to be able to look at the world more from a glass half full, right? They come from a posture that allows them to see the world in a manner that is more positive in its outlook than starting from a negative posture. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Have a sense of control, believing that they can influence the outcome of events. So characteristics of resilient people, they see the situation, they know their role in it, they know that they have a piece of control or whatever that circle of control is that they can tap into. They believe that they are also part of the outcome of that event, right? Resilient individuals tend to have a higher level of self-compassion. They tend to be able to self-soothe or engage in self-care, some things that will allow them to reorient and decompress and get into the space that they need to so that they're better able to engage with the challenging situations that pop up. Resilient people tend to have solid social networks, right? So having a large group or having a solid group of people that can be turned to in case of need. Resilient people tend to have this characteristic as well. They have a large social circle. And what we found during the pandemic, unfortunately, is that people were more highly isolated, right? We're following recommendations. We were unclear about what direction this was going to take, or was it airborne? Was it transmitted by touch? So we found ourselves completely isolated from each other. And human beings by nature are pack animals. We tend to need to be together. We need that support. And so you'll find that characteristics of resilient people tend to include that solid network of social supports. And lastly, in this list here, we want to talk about resilient people as seeing themselves as fighters rather than victims. Again, it's all on the posture in which you present yourself, or which you engage in your outlook, right? So if you're seeing yourself more as someone who is not going to diminish under the pressure or diminish under the circumstance, but actually flourish under that or engage, right? That is a mindset and a characteristic of a resilient person. So on the inpatient unit and on the outpatient unit here and the behavioral health units here at Suburban Hospital, we focus a lot on modalities of treatment, right? So one of the modalities that we focus on, or types of psychotherapy, is called cognitive behavioral therapy. And so CBT, as it's more widely known, is a very well-known type of psychotherapy. It's been around for quite some time. It's the most widely studied. It has the most shown to have the most positive results in terms of its effectiveness. And so when we talk about it in terms of resiliency, we look at CBT and its relationship and its tenets to how that can help build a resiliency. So cognitive behavior therapy talks about developing a positive attitude by recognizing patterns of thinking which inhibit the ability to cope. So we're talking about positivity, we're talking about cognitions and patterns of thinking, and we're talking about that inability to orient yourself around the challenge because of challenges that you may have in patterns of thinking, right? So CBT allows us to think about how our thoughts drive our emotions and also our behaviors. Another tenet of CBT talks about our internal core beliefs. So cognitive behavioral therapy asks us to evaluate our belief system and notice if some of our individual core beliefs may be clouding our thinking. So for example, a core belief could be, I'm not good enough, right? I'm not smart enough, I'm not capable. These could be beliefs that somewhere along the line became solidified and became part of our internal characteristics for ourselves. And core beliefs are not necessarily something that is true. Right? It is something that developed along our life course, right? And we've owned that and we've solidified it. We wear it as a badge on our shirts. We wear, we are that person. And it's a posture in which we see the world. And unfortunately, it can cloud the way that we interact with the world, right? It can prevent us from really seeing things clearly. It can prevent us from engaging in a different capacity when we are faced with this adversity or this stress or what have you, that's causing us to question our resiliency, if you will. So it can give us misinformation and miscues, and we use that, unfortunately, to inform ourselves. And what it does is it inhibits our ability to bounce back, right? And that's what we're talking about, the elasticity of being able to bounce back. So CBT also, referring again to the relationship between how we think, feel, and act, it's an important, it's an invaluable sort of skill or idea to focus on. But also what CBT does is it introduces the idea of distorted thinking. So cognitive behavioral therapy asserts that we each have automatic negative thoughts or cognitive distortions that creep in and to no fault of our own, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about cognitive distortions and how they show up and can inhibit us from being able to be more resilient, because they cloud really how we are engaging with the world. They cloud how we see, and they provide us, again, just like those core beliefs, misinformation, right? So so when we have these automatic negative thoughts or distorted thinking or cognitive distortions, what they end up doing is creating a ripple effect in terms of our emotional state and our behaviors, right? So if we are coming from a posture of negativity, we're having informed negative thoughts, those things trickle down and they unfortunately impact our mood, causing us to have a depressed mood, anxiety mood, or hopelessness, helplessness, whatever that might be. And that translates into our behavior. So if you're feeling hopeless, you're likely also going to engage in behaviors that's going to prevent you from really showing up in the world the way that you want to, right? And so cognitive distortions can, when we dovetail those with serious events, life illness, grief, trauma, those types of things, when we put all those together, it really challenges our ability to move forward and to be more resilient and snap back or bounce back to the type of person that we were before, prior to this event. So let's talk a little bit about those cognitive distortions. So at the onset of CBT, there were about 10. I think there's 17 to 25 now, depending on who you read, but I pick and chose a few that I thought would be important in terms of resiliency, and I want to just kind of walk them through with you. So the first one is filtering. This is a type of distorted thinking where we are ignoring positive aspects of a situation and focusing on the negative. So imagine your coffee machine, imagine your cup of coffee. So you put the grounds in the machine, you pour the water in, right? And so the water comes out, and guess what? That's your coffee. Well, in this example, that coffee is your negative emotion, where you are leaving all of this other stuff, all the good grounds, in your coffee filter. And so you're only focusing on this negative, right? So you're only focusing on this one aspect and ignoring all the other aspects of the situation. Second one, polarized or black and white thinking. So it kind of is what it sounds, right? Thinking in extremes, the two polars, North Pole, South Pole, right? So not really being able to recognize that there's a gray area in between, not really being able to understand that it is not always as black and white as we would hope. And that is a cognitive distortion in the fact that when we engage in that kind of thinking, we are limiting our ability to see that there are lots of nuances in the way things happen. Overgeneralization. So thinking in terms of a never-ending pattern of defeat based on one event. So you have one experience, and that one experience, if you are engaged in this type of cognitive distortion, of overgeneralization, you see that one experience as this is ongoing, this always happens, this is my life, this is my story, right? So imagine if you're overgeneralizing one situation and you're having this sort of event, right? Like let's say the pandemic or grief or loss or medical issue, some of those things that we need to draw on resiliency to pull us back from. You have this thought and you base every other thought on this one event, and it's all going towards the negative. It's going to be so difficult to bounce back, right? So recognizing overgeneralization is important in this regard. Magnification, otherwise known as catastrophizing, and minimization. So two sides of the coin. So magnification, catastrophizing, I'm guilty of it, I do it, is you take one situation and you blow it way out of proportion. You blow it way up. So this one little event becomes the end of the world, it becomes the end of times, right? You take that one situation, and because of that distorted thinking, it popped into your head, it allowed you to blow that out to such a large scale that you unfortunately now cannot see beyond that. And it spirals into your mood, it spirals into your behavior, and it's this vicious triangle that keeps continuing. conversely, minimization, right, is that you diminish the value of anything positive. So you have that one good event, you have that one good thing, you have that, and you say the qualifier after it. You say, but this, right? But that. And you're taking sort of the success that you have earned, the power that you've earned away from that. You're diminishing it, you're minimizing it. So let's keep going. So some other cognitive distortions, jumping to conclusions. So we talk about jumping to conclusions, which it is what it is. It's assuming that others, your mind reading, you're assuming that others are harboring negative feelings towards you without any evidence. So Sally hates me. Sally does not like me. Sally thinks I'm a bad person. And if there's a Sally in the audience today, I apologize. But Sally thinks I'm a bad person. Why does Sally think that? I have no idea. I'm jumping to conclusions. I'm mind reading that situation. I'm entering in or putting into words or putting into thought something that might not actually be based on reality. And so I'm doing that without the evidence. Disqualifying the positive, very similar to what we were talking about in terms of minimization. You're discounting the positive qualities about yourself. You're discounting the accomplishments about yourself. And keep in mind, and when we're talking about cognitive distortions in relation to resiliency, it's really important to recognize that, again, all of these different cognitive distortions, or sometimes we call them automatic negative thoughts or irrational thinking, all of those different things can show up and really inhibit our ability to bounce back. And that's the goal. We're trying to recover. We're trying to recognize that the reality has happened, that something severe has happened, something intense has happened, that life has had an impact on you. And that is human. That is the human experience, like I said earlier. But these cloud your ability to sort of navigate back, to steer that ship back. So personalization, feeling responsible and guilty for negative outcomes. So unless you're omnipresent, right? Unless you are there in every facet of every piece of everything in the world, you are not responsible for everything, right? So personalization is that cognitive distortion where we believe, yes, in fact, I am the reason, I am guilty, I am the reason that this outcome is the way it is, and it is my fault. But the reality is we are not responsible for everything, but it is a distorted way of thinking. It's a self-protective factor that we put in, and it's a distorted way of thinking. Emotional reasoning. So interpretation of events based solely on emotions, not on facts. I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm upset, right? So because I feel this way, the situation must in fact be true. But is it true, right? So we have to take the time to go back and evaluate the facts and separate out a little bit of the emotion, not invalidating the emotion. The emotion is the feeling we're having, but is it informed by the correct information? Is it informed by facts? Is it informed by something that actually can provide details to the situation? If it's not, if we're solely in that emotional state of mind, what that ends up doing for us is it inhibits our ability to recognize the situation for what it is and to reorient or reformulate the way that we're going to engage with it. So last set of cognitive distortions. So you got the short version of the 17-25 cognitive distortions, but should statements. So the idea of should statements in cognitive distortions talks about the applying of rules using language like should have, ought to, must have. I should have done this. He should have done that. I ought to do this. They ought to do that. So it's applying a set of rules there that might actually be inhibiting or preventing us from being able to see more clearly because we have set these set of rules. You should have done that. Well, okay, but what is that about? You know, I should have done this. I'm a bad person because I didn't do this. All right, well, what is that about? Why are you setting these rules on yourself? Where is that coming from? Is that coming from a posture of insecurity? Is that coming from a posture of inner critic or self-doubt? Why is it that there's a should? And what can you do to change that in terms of being comfortable? And when you talk about crises or different experiences like that, it's easy, unfortunately, to get into that should mind because oh, well, this is the way it was. I should have done this and I wouldn't have this situation. If you can shift away from that type of thinking, it allows you to be a little bit more elastic in your thinking and come back to center and not focus so heavily on that, and work through ultimately what you need to in terms of returning to a resilient state. Blaming, placing blame on others without considering how personal attitudes or behaviors may have contributed. It's your fault. Sally, if you're out there, it's your fault, right? It's not my fault. So if I do that, if I place the blame, I'm taking all this responsibility away from myself and passing it to another person, and not recognizing or not putting any awareness or intention to the fact that what is my role in this? What's my relationship with this? And the last one we'll talk about in terms of cognitive distortions is heaven's reward fallacy, right? Expecting that your sacrifices and hard work today will cause future reward and becoming upset when it doesn't work out. So yes, we want to work hard. Yes, we want to sacrifice, right? We want to do the things that we can so that we in the future show up differently, but there's no guarantee, right? And so to enter into that posture that, yes, I'm going to have all of these expectations met, ultimately can be harmful, right? And so that's a little bit of distorted thinking. A way to think about cognitive distortions before we move on is think of them as ants, right? Little creepy crawly ants that we don't like, that get into our pantry and get to our sugar bowls and such. Ants, automatic negative thoughts, right? Automatic, they happen without any fault of our own. Negative, just a positive versus negative. These are negative thinking patterns and thoughts. So those ants come up and they cloud our ability to see things for how they are. And that is human, unfortunately. We all do it. I do it. I'm notorious for catastrophizing. So, we have to be gentle with ourselves in that regard, but also bringing recognition to it. So how do we challenge those cognitive distortions? The first is to identify the distorted thinking pattern that you're engaged in, right? What am I doing? Am I should have, could have? Am I ought to? Am I engaging in catastrophizing? Am I minimizing the situation? Am I blaming others? What am I doing in terms of my relationship with this pattern of thinking? And is this pattern of thinking driving my mood? Am I becoming more depressed? Am I becoming more anxious? Am I becoming more upset because of this pattern of thinking? And how does that show up in my behavior? Am I stepping away from my friends? Am I engaging in self-medication? Am I isolating? What does that look like, right? So understanding and identifying the distorted pattern of thinking is one of the first steps that you can do in terms of trying to challenge that. And so CBT talks about challenging the cognitive distortion, right? Engaging in cognitive restructuring. So we talked about this in a previous slide in terms of examining the evidence. Do I have all the evidence that I need to make an informed decision, right? Am I leading with that emotional mind, or do I have that frame of mind that allows me to pick apart the evidence? Is this factual or is it based on emotion, right? And putting those thoughts on trial. That is an actual skill where you get to be judge and jury, you get to be defense, and you get to be prosecutor, and you get to put that thought on trial and say, wait a minute, is this real? Is this real? Do I have the facts that support it? Is it based in emotion? What can I do to separate out that? Challenging cognitive distortions also asks us to reframe or develop positive or neutral counter statements to those thoughts. So, easy example, I'm a bad person. I'm a good person. Those are two opposite, right? I'll give you an example. So if you're driving on the Beltway, and which God bless you if you are. If you're driving on the Beltway and someone cuts you off, your immediate thought may be, that guy is a jerk. That guy is a terrible person, right? So it's a pretty negative thought, right? You're going straight for it. Maybe the neutral or positive counter statement is, that guy cut me off. Maybe he has an emergency, right? So it's two different views of the same situation. It's the exact same stimulation. It's the exact same situation. The person cut you off. That is factual, but your relationship with the facts is what it can limit or encourage your mood, right? So cognitive distortions, challenging those, part of it could be understanding what the best and the worst case scenario is. And if the worst case scenario were to come true, what's the likelihood of that? And what would that look like over time? Would the intensity of that diminish? Would you be able to return to some sort of homeostasis, some sort of normalcy, right? So let's switch gears and talk a little about what we came here for, which are those techniques for building resilience. So we have a foundation in terms of thinking about CBT as a framework that allows us to challenge that negative thinking, that allows us to reorient, right? But when we talk about techniques for building resiliency, got about 10 of them that we're going to go over. And so the first is finding a sense of purpose, right? So increasing meaning, focus on being an agent of positive change. Some of you may be familiar with Dr. Martin Seligman from University of Pennsylvania, author of Authentic Happiness, right? He's kind of the founder of positive psychology. So positive psychology talks about all facets of things, but he brings up 3 domains of happiness, and it dovetails nicely with this building resilience in that one of the domains is finding meaning, right? So 3 domains of happiness could be the pleasant life, the good life, and a meaningful life. And so the meaningful life is that sense of altruism, right? Finding your calling, giving back to the world, sharing the gifts that you have with the world, right? And so finding a sense of purpose. Number 2, believing in your abilities. So knowing your limits, but celebrating your abilities. On the outpatient unit here, the day treatment program, we do a skill that's called developing a strengths use plan. It's kind of a clunky way to say it, but what we do is we provide a list of strengths. What are some things that are strengths of yours? And we ask our clients, our patients to go through that list and say, okay, this is me. I have a love of learning. I am smart. I am humorous. I like music. What are your strengths? You go through and find those characteristics and then develop a plan to celebrate those, celebrate them and actionize them. So we give them a 7-day schedule. Here's Monday through Friday. Take those 7 days, take those 7 strengths that you have, put them down, and then for each one, develop one skill or one action that you want to do to celebrate or honor those. So love of learning. Today's Thursday, maybe on Thursday, you'll sign up for a TED Talk or a webinar with some random guy at Suburban Hospital who's going to talk to you about resiliency. How are you going to honor? Thank you. How are you going to honor or get into that space where you're celebrating your strengths, where you're believing in your abilities? So, number 3, developing a strong social network. Surrounding yourself with those who prop you up instead of tearing you down, right? Know who is in your support network and who the appropriate person is for those various roles. Who do you go to when you need support, right? And what support can that person provide you? And is that person the right person? So understanding those allows you to have a little bit more propping up, right? So techniques for building resiliency, part 2, embracing change, bringing awareness that challenges and difficulties happen indiscriminately. It's that why me or why not me, right? We are all going to face some level of challenge, some level of suffering, some level that is going to test us, that's going to force us to step beyond who we are. And understanding that and knowing that that is likely going to happen whenever, without necessarily encouraging or wanting it, gives us some flexibility in terms of elasticity to say, you know what, I have the capacity to deal with this. I won't be so rigid in my thinking that I'm not going to be able to engage in this. I know that there is going to be a life change for me. I know that there is going to be a future that is going to involve a loss of a parent, what have you. I know that it's going to happen. Doesn't mean that it's going to be easy when it does happen, but to understand and embrace that there is change that will happen allows you to pull from that well and be a little bit more prepared in terms of when those situations arise. Being optimistic. So coming from a posture of positivity, focusing on positives, reframing your negative thinking. That is what we're talking about with CBT. We're looking at those cognitive distortions. You know, if you're coming from that posture of being negative, right? When a situation happens, if you look at this as being 0 and you're coming from a posture of negativity, let's call it a -1, when those situations happen that cause you distress and cause you to need to rely on resiliency, you're starting at a -1. So you've got even harder time to go to get beyond that place, to get back to homeostasis, to get back to center, right? So starting from a posture of positivity allows you maybe to start from a +1. So when those situations happen, which are inevitable, you're able to bounce back more quickly. Nurturing yourself. So engaging in behaviors that support your well-being, whether it's physical, mental, spiritual, right? Building in time to exercise, to sleep, to get restful sleep, right? Maybe yoga, meditation, what have you. Diet, not listed here, but also very important. So taking care of your physical well-being, taking care of your mental well-being, whether that is, you know, education, right? And your spiritual well-being in terms of not spiritual, could be religious based, right? Could also just be spirituality, right? Those are two different things. And just nurturing that. So is it meditation? Is it being part of your congregation or your religious environment, right? Going to your place of worship and connecting with your belief system, but nurturing yourself is the key there. So nurturing all aspects of yourself. By doing that, you build another well, you build a place where you are holding some of that excess strength and energy, so that when these situations pop up, you're able to draw from that, because it's inevitable that they're going to happen. It's being propped up and being ready and supportive and nurturing yourself, so that when these situations happen, that you're able to better deal with them. So problem solving. We talked about this as a characteristic. We're talking about it as a technique. So, you know, the world sometimes can feel like Atlas, right? We're holding the world above us and we're barely able to contain, and we're barely able to hold on, because the weight of the world is on our shoulders. So looking at that and knowing that and developing problem solving skills, breaking things down into smaller chunks, breaking things down into more manageable pieces so that you're better able to address it, allows you to not have the weight of the world on your shoulders. It allows you to have the weight there, but you're addressing it one by one. You're navigating it. You're using those skills. You're trying to discern and pick apart those things that may ultimately be causing you that level of distress. And the other piece of that is knowing your limits, right? To think that we're able to do everything for everything is not realistic, right? We want to make honest efforts to do the things that we can, but also being very cognizant that we have a limited capacity to do everything. So knowing what that limit is very important. So taking those problem solving skills and establishing goals from them. We know that the sense of goal completion or developing goals has a profound ability to help orient the mind towards moving forward. So we talk a lot about in day treatment, getting the ball a little bit further down the field. So you have the weight of the world, you have Atlas and the weight of the world, right? You're trying to move forward, but it feels insurmountable because it's completely there and it's viscerally the weight of the world on your shoulder. So if you can establish a goal and pick it apart a little bit into smaller chunks and move slightly forward, that's a win. You know, if you get to the 50-yard line, you get to the next step, you move a little bit further down the field until you accomplish that goal, right? Are they realistic and are they attainable? All of that. And so take action. Once you have those in place, take that action, put those plans in motion, right? Set a timeline to complete it so that it doesn't become this overwhelming sense of burden. And lastly, seek support. You know, like I said, there are some things that we can't know everything about everything. We can't solve everything about everything. We're not all savants, right? We're not able to resolve every aspect of our lives, and that is completely reasonable. That's okay. And so that's the support network. And the additional thing is that maybe the support is needed by a professional. Maybe you need to work with somebody who's more skilled in that capacity and who can turn and support you in a way that's meaningful, right? So in conclusion, we all fall, we all stumble. The known reality is that life is full of twists and turns, and we will be challenged. Our ability to navigate these challenges is what defines us. Our ability to bounce back and reorient after trying times is the work we must engage. I like this quote a lot by Nelson Mandela above this, which is, "Do not judge me by my success. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." So I really appreciate everyone's attention. And at this point, we can open it back up for questions. And I'll turn it back over to Eleni.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim. I was, listening to your presentation, and it just kind of reminds me as well that, to stay positive, to stay positive, and to just keep moving along. And when we all experience bumps in the road, to keep moving forward, and just and I always try to keep a smile on my face, even in moments of panic and adversity.
Adversity, right.
Adversity, yeah. So thank you so much for that reminder. I appreciate it. Do we have any questions from our audience today? If so, please use the Q&A box. Let me just see here. If there are any questions from any of the folks that are on the phone or on the webinar today.
Is there anyone named Sally in the audience, just in case I offended someone?
I don't think so.
Just checking.
I have a question. What do you do? Do you follow your own advice, Jim? What do you do to stay resilient and positive, and especially during these tough times?
Yeah, I mean, what's really fascinating to me is that the pandemic really turned everyone on their heads, right? So, and it continues to. So, it's an unprecedented time, is the thing that you keep hearing in the news, or you have heard for a long period. And for me, that definitely having that positive outlook, right? Knowing that I am not able to change everything, but to be comfortable with the fact that there is uncertainty, that there is change. There's opportunity for us to, well, for me specifically, what I do is, I try to focus on my physical well-being, try to, make sure that the things that are within my circle of control, that I actually try to control them, right? That the things that are outside of my circle of control, I allow for that space, because I just don't have the capacity to do everything. And so, positive psychology also talks a little bit about, experiences in gratitude, right? So just trying to be altruistic and be supportive and be, compassionate. And so I just think that there's a lot of value to that. And I think that it's really important to have that as your posture, right? So to recognize how your posture is in the way that you engage in the world.
I thank you. That's just a good reminder. Too. I was reminded, that like a bad habit, negative thoughts. It's kind of, when like it's a path. It's a very worn path, and it's very easy when something bad happens, or when something happens and trips you up, that you go back into that like negative route. And so I think the work that a person must do is to kind of like get off that kind of negative dug in path, and kind of, get onto another mindset. Right. So thank you for that.
Yeah, for sure.
So we have a couple comments and a question here. I'm going to go with the question first. How long do you think we should try how long do you think we should try by ourselves before seeking help? Or rather, are there signs that we may need professional help?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's an individual, right? So when on this side of the equation, when we're thinking about it and when we're trying to determine how we can best support people, we try to figure out, how is this showing up in your life? Where are you? You know, some people use the word baseline, right? Where are you at your point before things started to spiral one way or the other? And how does that show up, right? Are you having an inability to function? Are you not able to do the things that you would hope to do, or show up in the world in a meaningful way, the way that you would hope to? And if the answer is consistently yes, and you're not able to do the things that you want, and you're trying, right? Let's say you try and you try to do some of these skills and and you're just not having the results you want, then I would say, seek someone else. Maybe you could start ultimately with your peer group, your support network. Hey, I've done this, I've been trying this, I'm not having much luck. What do you think? Or seek out professional help. And of course, if it has gotten to the point where you are feeling an intense amount of emotions that would cause you to engage in behaviors that are self-harm or even more, then yes, you would want to seek out help immediately, right? But I don't think that there's ever a wrong time to seek out help. I think you can engage with whether it's mental health or counseling or recovery or whatever it is that is causing you distress. I think you can engage with somebody as soon as you feel it's appropriate, right? So if you have that feeling like, I feel like I need to go talk to somebody, go do it.
Just so that we all, thank you. Just so that we are all aware, what are like the signs of anxiety? Not just, oh, I'm anxious, I'm nervous, but what are like the signs of like real anxiety? That where you have to go see, professional help, maybe see a psychologist.
Yeah, I mean, there's there's a lot, right? I mean, we're talking about panic, we're talking about gosh, okay, sorry, let me back up. We're talking about inability to think straight. We're talking about if you're talking about somatic feelings, if you're having just palm sweats and things like that, that could just be a natural human response. And that is tied into regular sort of could be just regular anxiety, right? So our bodies are our sympathetic nervous systems, our nervous system is designed to send us signals to say, hey, back up. But if you're not sleeping, you're constantly ruminating, which is repeating patterns of thinking where you cannot break that cycle. You are maybe you're not eating, maybe you're not engaged in those things that you normally would find pleasure from, and that skews towards depression, but that can be anxiety. Those types of things, among many, right, would be reasons to consider like, okay, well, I'm not doing as well as I would hope. And there is some room for subjectivity in that, I may have a different level of distress tolerance than someone else. So my ability to deal with a certain level of anxiety might be different than someone else's, right? And that is all based on, experience, based on life experience and coping skills and those types of things. So, but it really comes down to how your symptoms or how your body is responding, how your mind is responding. If you are not doing well, if you are stuck in this pattern of just thinking and thinking and thinking, your mind is trying to help you, but what it's doing is inhibiting you, right? And it's probably sending you signals. It's probably giving you, GI issues. It's probably trying to send you issues about, muscular, like, are you tense? Are you having that sort of thing? So it's bringing some awareness to that and trying to recognize how far from what is my quote unquote normal. I hate the word normal, but quote unquote normal. How far am I from that? And what do I need to do to address it?
Thank you. That's a lot. So Betty says that we should all try to remain non-judgmental. Totally agree with you, Betty.
Agreed.
And to stay focused as possible. Focus on the present and not what's in the past and not what's in the future. So thank you, Betty, for those comments.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would just add to that too. I talk a lot about our story is our story, right? We can't change the past. And so the only thing we can do is change our relationship with how it impacts us moving forward. So if we're able to recognize that our story is our story and there's nothing we can do about that, but change our relationship with it, that's the work, right? That's the thing that we got to focus on.
Fran Miller, she says, good job, Jim.
Thanks. Thanks so much.
And she also would like to know if you're a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
I am neither. I am a licensed clinical social worker. And so my background is my undergrad is in social work. My grad school is in social work. And yeah, so I'm a licensed clinical social worker.
Social workers do a lot of wonderful work. I think they do a lot of the, because we have them, obviously you're here in our hospital. So you guys do a lot of wonderful work with our community and our patients. So shout out to social workers. Betty also says, if someone is suddenly acting, thinking much out of character, it is important to be aware of any medical changes as well. So I guess,
Sure.
If anyone's acting irrational, perhaps maybe that's just something, maybe it could be something else too.
Yeah, certainly.
Did anyone else have any other questions for Jim? Okay. Any tips for those who are interested in seeking help, just finding a therapist, whether it's a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist? Are there any tips out there? It seems
Certainly. Yeah. I mean, there's lots of forums, right? Some folks go to NAMI, NAMI. So, that's a huge resource in terms of National of Mental Illness. So people go there and look for groups, or they look for peer groups, or it's oriented towards, families also. It's a great resource in terms of education. Psychology Today is an online aggregating website where different therapists will upload their bio and talk about what their insurance panels are, or their different things that they provide in terms of types of therapy and such. So that is also one that we encourage people to go to because it's helpful, but it can be a little bit challenging and frustrating. One of the things that I try to do when I help people locate providers of their own is, you sort of figure out what your parameters are. Do you want a male? Do you want a female? Do you want someone who can address a certain issue? Do you want somebody that is with your insurance panel? And so having that and paring down some of those different parameters allows you to have a more focused view of what you want, and allows you to engage. And then, there's different organizations, right? There's organizations for CBT. So some people respond to different types of therapies. So maybe somebody wants to focus on CBT. Maybe someone wants to focus on something like DBT, which is another form of therapy, so whatever it is. So people can Google those types of therapies and find sort of local resources. But if I just want to talk to somebody and I want to get connected, Psychology Today is a really great starting point, because it allows you to aggregate down based on the parameters that you have, for the information that you need to get to the right person.
Great. And I also put that in the chat as well, those two resources. So thank you.
Yeah, certainly.
So if there aren't any other questions, we will conclude. Thank you again, Jim, for your time and the presentation. Everyone, please make sure that you complete the evaluation. And the recording will be available in the coming days. It will be on our YouTube page, Suburban Hospital's YouTube page. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. And thank you again, Jim, and see you everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.